It is Friday, June 18th. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello, everyone. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware of at this point, we have a lot to talk about, so let's just dive right in. First up, as always, the PS Plus reminder. The June games are still available, so if you haven't yet, download them, add them to your library, do whatever, get it done, out of the way, so you don't forget. But for our first story, let's talk about PS5 system software updates, because Sony recently confirmed that later this year there is another major update coming, which will presumably have a lot of changes and features that the UI sorely needs in many respects, but it's the phrasing here which is important, later this year. So this kind of tells us that maybe this alleged summer update is not coming, because this is the one where we were expecting to have the ability to expand internal storage, and this is also where Sony would have to release a list of drives that are compatible, so you don't spend $200 on a drive that doesn't work for your PS5. So assuming that's a part of a major update, it seems like that might take a little bit longer, depending on what it means for Sony when they say later this year. Could be autumn, could be holiday season for that matter, but that might also be largely dependent on what they do for the second part of this news story, which is Sony recently opened up their site to accept beta invites, or rather you can submit your PSN ID to let Sony know that you're interested in testing PS5 beta firmwares moving forward. So much like they did for the entirety, well, about the entire PS4 lifecycle, you can start testing PS5 beta firmwares if you are selected. So you can head to PlayStation.com, submit your PSN ID just one time, which I'll leave this link down below, but you only have to submit one time and then you're automatically in the running for any upcoming beta firmware that the company does end up doing. And that way you can test new features, provide feedback to Sony, and if you have problems on the beta firmware, you can always roll back to the last official wide release. And hopefully this will work out much better than how it did on PS4. I mean, it was largely okay, but there were still plenty of wide releases where, you know, there were some issues for a lot of people. Also, it seems like they were ignoring a good amount of feedback for some of those last updates on PS4, so we'll see how that plays out on PS5, but yeah, the UI does need work, and we're slowly getting there. Moving on to our next story, after nearly half a year, or no, over half a year, Cyberpunk 2077 is finally coming back to the PlayStation Store this Monday, June 21st. It will be reinstated, and it looks like the game is finally in a decent state where Sony's satisfied with the progress that's been made with all the patches, like the recent one, 1.23, where that's just another laundry list of things that need to be fixed in the game. So they're getting there slowly but surely, so it seems like they're finally in a better place now where Sony was okay with it. But what's funny is that they did put out a statement, Sony did, where they recommend you still avoid playing on a base PS4. So if it can be helped for the best performance, play on a PS4 Pro or a PS5, which, I mean, the recommendation the entire time was, you know, play it on PC or wait for those native next-gen versions for Series S, X, PS5, which I'm personally still waiting for the PS5 version. But, you know, some people still played it on PS4 or X1, still had a good time. It really goes to your tolerance with these sort of things, but obviously you're always better off waiting, so that's something where I would still say you should probably just do that. Now, while speaking about patches, we can also quickly touch on this one. Returnal had update 1.4 drop, which for a lot of people playing the game or waiting to play the game, this is going to be a big one for you. So it's not quite the one with the save function that will let you quit the game and still return to a run midway in. That's not it, but this does include many fixes for trophy-related issues, also some game balancing as well, which when I jumped back in for a little bit, it seemed like the game, certain enemies were harder, I think. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I did put the game down for a bit after I finished the Platinum, but you all saw my Platinum video where I ran into a lot of issues with the survey trophies. People have been having a lot of problems finding Scout Log 9 and many other Scout Logs for that matter because it's RNG, so you know, you can't really help the fact that if you run rooms over and over again, you might not find the scout log that you need. So they increased the drop rate for a lot of those scout logs. So it's much better if you're going into this to try and earn the Platinum, which I wish I had that opportunity when I went for the Platinum. But either way, the game is slowly improving there as well, so Housemarque's done a pretty good job. Now, another patch that we can talk about, because this one's also pretty noteworthy, is one for Call of Duty Warzone. So recently the game was patched to where if you're playing it on PS5, you can now run it up to 120 frames per second. And this is kind of a big deal because at this point we've seen that it's well documented across all these games and developers openly that PS4 software cannot go above 60 FPS when played on PS5. It's just inherently how PS5 handles backwards compatibility with those PS4 and PS4 Pro boost modes, where PS5 acts as a supercharged PS4, but inherently it's still separate title IDs. So PS4 games can acknowledge that they're playing on PS5 in some way, but it's not quite like how Microsoft has one executable across all their consoles, so X1 games can start taking advantage of all the new GDK features that are accessible to Series S and X games. That's how that works so well. But anyway, we're seeing that for Warzone, if you want this to work, you have to go into PS5 settings, turn on the game presets to favor performance, and also turn on automatic 120 hertz refresh rate, and that way you can get the game to recognize that it can go above 60 FPS on a HDMI 2.1 compatible TV. That's how you'll get 4K 120. If you don't have a compatible 2.1 set, then the game will play at 1080 120, which I think is still okay. You'll probably have better performance there for the frame rate. But we had that, and then we also had Jedi: The Fallen Order come out, the native PS5 version, and that game read PS4 save files. So again, at this point we've seen that's not guaranteed. In fact, it's developer dependent to support that, and if they do support it, it's kind of a pain where you have to manually upload the save file from the PS4 version, pull it from the PS5 version, so the save file is converted essentially. But it looks like whatever Sony did behind the scenes with the PS4 SDK, because I'm guessing that's the angle that they approach this at, because again, you have to trick PS4 games when they're played on PS5, which kind of tells you how they did it from the settings thing that you have to do for Warzone. But it looks like they did something there where they remedied these two, not major complaints, but certainly two things where it's like, okay, you know, your competitor has it, it would be nice to have it here, and so it's not a huge inconvenience, especially with the save file thing. Looks like they've figured out a solution, so hopefully moving forward, more cross-gen games and previous-gen titles can take advantage of this. Anyway, moving on to our next news story, E3 is over, and mind you, we do still have more live streams coming, but for now, the 4 or 5 day window of E3, where it was a bunch of publishers and the two platform holders hosting live streams, that's all done, and we can quickly touch on one of the rumors that we were discussing a few weeks ago, which was, well, we were waiting for the Square show to see Final Fantasy Origins, which was an alleged PS5 exclusive, later coming to PC, a Souls-like Final Fantasy game, and the report was mostly accurate. So the game is multi-platform. It will be available on pretty much everything, but it's called Strangers of Paradise Final Fantasy Origins. Definitely a Souls-like game, so the direction and name was loosely correct, right? So the game is real. And, well, the trailer was pretty interesting, considering it's, well, it's got some B-tier vibes, and the protagonist really does not like chaos, judging from his overuse of the word chaos, and really just not liking it whatsoever. He really wants to get rid of it. The game does have a PS5 demo exclusively, which that did not work out whatsoever, so that was not launching at all. They had to patch it 2-3 days after the fact, and once you're playing it, it seems like a lot of people are really enjoying it. I haven't tried it just yet, so I can't share my thoughts, but that's how that rumor panned out. So, I mean, that's something we'll always do here, right? If we discuss a rumor and we have the result of it at some point, whether it's a year ago or, you know, a few weeks ago, we'll always touch on the final result, which in this case, not any sort of major Sony involvement outside of the demo which came out. For our next news story, I want you to strap yourselves in for what might be perhaps one of the craziest PlayStation conspiracies that's really taken the internet by storm in the last 24 hours or so. It's still developing as I record this. I might have to add things in post, but I want you to really prepare yourselves for this if you haven't been keeping up with it, which a lot of you have. And there's no way we're going to be able to cover every single facet of what's going on here, but if you remember, Blue Box Game Studios, a random small indie team, announced Abandon on the PS blog a while ago. A lot of people had a gut reaction that was a Kojima project, and they shot it down. Even I said at the time, I feel bad for that small studio where they were mistaken for it right away. But then they announced they're putting out this abandoned PS5 application where it's going to be a gateway to a bunch of upcoming images and trailers, and that seemed very unusual. That one I was like, okay, well, that seems a bit weird. Now, we've seen things like that before, but it's not very commonplace. And also, it's a PS5 exclusive, not even PS4, PC. Usually these small indie teams are at least shipping on, you know, console and PC, or, you know, last gen, current gen, whatever the case may be, right? And then they had that PS blog post. So I always thought that was a little bit strange up to this point. Well, now we've got something where on June 15th, on their Twitter account, they posted, guess the name, Abandoned, first letter S, last letter L, reveal closing in. And then they had to announce later in the day, we want to set things straight. We have no relations with Konami. Silent Hills is owned by Konami. We don't have any relations with Hideo Kojima. Of course, people thought that first tweet was referencing Silent Hills, or Silent Hill rather. But since then, it seems like the internet has done some serious investigating to draw a lot of connections that are very suspectful and a little too coincidental for everyone's liking, enough to really turn a lot of people into believers that, oh my gosh, maybe this really is a Hideo Kojima project, maybe it really is Silent Hill, maybe there's something weird going on where this is not just a small team putting out a project that may or may not even be all that really exciting to begin with. So a few things as an example, we'll try to quick fire a lot of these off, but we're not going to be able to cover all of them. Hideo Kojima sent out a tweet where he references Silent and Hill, two separate words, within the bulk of the tweet. The Blue Box Game Studios logo is basically an inverted image of the PlayStation Studios logo, which this one is probably the most, the weirdest one to me, especially because they're using the same font. There's new Silent Hill merchandise that's apparently releasing very soon on the Konami store. Employees at the company LinkedIn profile are using stock photos. Jeff Keighley, who's very close friends with Hideo Kojima, he follows the studio on Twitter and Instagram. Then he confirmed he's talking with Blue Box and that he's going to help them promote their game. Blue Box Game Studios was founded in 2015, 1 year after the release of PT, and around the time that Kojima was going through his breakup with Konami. One of their only games that they released, called The Whisperer, was completed by another studio, apparently, and the icon for it is a black handprint, which is a reference to Death Stranding. In the recent trailer for Death Stranding, the director's cut, you can see on Sam's backpack there's the Netherlands logo, which Blue Box Studios is apparently in the Netherlands. Every time they send a tweet, the time zone is actually quite late for them versus where it would be around 10 a.m. Tokyo time when people are at work and where things like that would happen. And then there's the studio head, Hasan Kahraman, HK for the initials, Hideo Kojima. Hasan Kahraman has an account on PSN, Sneaky Warrior, with a total number of 1,238 trophies. That's the same for, it's a direct reference to the Japanese Silent Hill 4 commercial. Kahraman on his PSN profile also played a game that is not available on the PlayStation Store, and it's using a siren head as the image, which Junji Ito reacted to a siren head a few months ago and implied he's working with Kojima. This next one a lot of people brought up. Hideo, translated from Japanese to Turkish, means Kahraman, which is the last name of the studio head, but there is a discrepancy here, so supposedly both of their names in their respective languages means hero, but that's not really the case, and the translation isn't completely correct here when you throw it into Google Translate, but it's being argued that Kojima is aware of that, and he knows that most people would use Google Translate anyway, and so these are the results that he would have wanted. Hasan Kahraman does have an Apple Store app profile with a bunch of low-quality, asset flip games under his belt, and one of the apps is called GoFit XL, which under the health and fitness category, the description of this app says it's a personal training PT program. Also, the abandoned trailer, at one point in the trailer you can pause it and a tree is covering up the letters T and P on a bunch of graffiti on a wall. There's also these two random YouTube channels where at one point one channel commented on Hassan's official channel, and that's where there's this weird reverse alphabet code, which if you translate it, it says abandoned. One of the oldest comments from 4 years ago says abandoned on it. Again, this rabbit hole, it goes deep, everybody. Now, over on Reset Era, the thread discussing a lot of this stuff, Jeff Keighley did chime in because, again, he's close to Kojima, and so that's where a lot of people are theorizing, why are you following, the Instagram and I believe also the Twitter accounts. And he basically shared a screenshot from his Twitter DMs where it looks like they reached out to him about saying, hey, we'd like to showcase our game at one of your summer events, but the problem here is that there's a very obvious timestamp of 6:15 p.m., which for Twitter, if you get a DM after 24 hours, it's going to show the date there, which means he either took the screenshot May 21st, like he says he received this, which would have been strange, but not entirely impossible. He either did that or this DM was sent very, very recently, and then he screenshotted it to try and present this as evidence that nothing, weird or bizarre is going on, that he's not a part of this. And then very recently, he also followed up saying he was contacted again. He's going to share screenshots soon. Also, their Twitter account is doing more teasing. And like I said, there's many other connections being made here, but those are some of the highlights. And to play on the other side of this, there very much is a documented history of the studio existing in some way, shape, or form, putting out asset flip games, and they had a failed Kickstarter. Hasan Kahraman seems like a real individual, but we can't figure out if Blue Box Game Studios is a very real team with multiple people, or if it really exists in terms of a physical location. I mean, this is where it's really sketchy and weird. But like I said, when the app came out, I thought that was a little strange. So right away when that announcement came out, not so much the blog post, but when you combine that with this weird specialized application, I'm like, okay, Sony's involved in some way where this is, I don't know if it's Kojima or Silent Hill. I'm still not entirely there just yet, but it's really something where having that with the app, I was like, all right, there's something, the game's getting special treatment in some way, shape, or form, and it's warranting it in some way, shape, or form. And so once we see what it looks like, we'll have a better idea and a better answer, which who knows if that will really be the case come June 20th or June 22nd, or maybe it'll be tomorrow since they're teasing something within 24 hours. But this is, the thing is, even though there's a documented history and they're a real company to some extent, there's the argument to be made that because Kojima's done this twice previously and it was very on the nose and kind of obvious the previous two times, that maybe they want to go the extra length and actually go out of their way to find what was a real, very small independent team with very little history online, to where you can actually step in and say, hey, we'll buy out the studio or whatever so we can run an ARG with your documented history to kind of throw people off for a curveball, right? If he's done this two times, maybe he'll do it a third time. And that's the only thing where I'm like, if it wasn't for the fact that Kojima does stuff like this and he's done it twice now, then I would be like, all right, team fake, maybe people are drawing a lot of connections out of thin air, confirmation bias, but boy, when you're in the rabbit hole, it's hard to dig your way out of it. So I don't know how to feel about this. I really don't. But I'm still leaning towards, it's not Kojima and Silent Hill. Maybe it could be just something entirely different. Again, the special treatment sort of thing. Whatever it ends up looking like, it's just not... I don't think it's quite this small little indie game that's going to come out and be nothing. But that's another angle where people are looking at it. It really is just a huge marketing ploy. The developers really eating this up and just going crazy with trying to associate themselves with Kojima to have all this spotlight, which even we're doing it right now, where thousands of you are watching this, and that's exactly what they want. And maybe the game will be revealed, be not all that great, huge backlash, but still going to be noteworthy for creating one of the biggest conspiracies in 2021 and for PlayStation in general. So I can't wait to see how this plays out. And I know this is going to be quite the conversation in the comments unless we have a more concrete answer by the time this is uploaded. Anyway, let's move on to our next news story, which is for the potential of a rumored upcoming PlayStation event. So it's still technically unconfirmed, of course, heavily rumored, but we've got more evidence suggesting that there is going to be an event coming within the next few weeks or so, closer to maybe the end of June or maybe going into July. So once again, coming from Reset Era, the user Noptra, which we've talked about a few times now, this is the individual that got so many things correct prior to PS5 coming out and the PS5 live streams. They say, and I quote, "Assuming nothing changed, just wait a couple of weeks." This is in reference to if we're going to see Final Fantasy 16 anytime soon, so presumably that would be at an upcoming PlayStation-focused live stream. And actually, we didn't cover this one, I think 2 weeks ago now at this point, but one user recently went through the vetting process on Reset Era, the user Ashong, which this person mentioned, I think, a few months back, but they were recently verified and vetted for the potential access of the information that they could have, where they say Sony is 100% having some kind of event or presentation in the summer. I know for a fact they were working on the God of War trailer for it, likely June, I believe. And this user does already have somewhat of a track record where they called out that God of War was going to be a cross-generation title. So nothing guaranteed, of course, always a rumor until it's real, but it's as we discussed in our potential PS5 event video a few weeks ago. The company has tons of things that they can talk about, and they have to very soon. But will they do, PlayStation blog stuff and State of Plays, which they could get away with? I mean, State of Plays are not strictly based on one title. They can always feature a handful of games, and they can do 3-4 of those out of the year, and that will be enough to get all the information that they want out. But it is always, I think, preferable and fun to have that one live stream throughout the year that has that same level of energy surrounding E3 that people really love, where it's, announcement, exciting things. You're waiting for that one big bombshell where you're waiting for a gameplay reveal of something you're super excited for. Here's a teaser of something, right? It's totally understandable. That's why a lot of people are wanting it and looking forward to it. And it seems like we might end up having that relatively soon, so we'll wait and see. Moving on to our next news story, according to a recent Bloomberg report with sources that are familiar with the matter at hand, the next generation PlayStation VR headset is slated to launch holiday 2022, with Sony apparently using Samsung OLEDs for the headset. Now, that's all this report claims, so consider this a rumor, but with this one and then our previous one from Upload VR, where we're hearing the headset might feature gaze tracking for foveated rendering, which would be great for developers extracting more out of the headset when they're making games for it, and then a display resolution of 4000 by 2040. This thing is sounding really good with the rumors and the official information that we have directly from Sony, and this release timeline is also very favorable, probably in Sony's best interest, because this thing would come out a year sooner versus what we saw with PS4 and PSVR. They might want to get this thing out sooner just so it has more time on the market, and I think there is going to be more of a willingness from the consumer end to not only maybe try it, but also buy it and actively play games for it and buy software for it on a regular basis. You know, when it's more comfortable to wear, when it's more comfortable to play for extended periods of time, and when it's only one wire and not kind of a hassle to drag out, then there is going to be a willingness to really engage with it long term, and I think that's what Sony's going for by aiming to release it in 2022, so we'll see. Next up, Sony Interactive Entertainment President and CEO Jim Ryan was speaking with Axios and made a number of comments regarding the PlayStation business in a number of ways, so we can talk about all these. First up, about how PS5 consoles are getting sold to bots and scalpers. Jim does mention that he's frustrated by what's happening there, and they're trying hard to get the consoles into the right hands through things like PS Direct, which actually we had a console drop just yesterday on PS Direct, if I'm not mistaken, and they did the same invite system, so if you put in your PSN ID a long time ago, then you would have been given an email invite to safely secure a PS5 console if you are in the queue and you're ahead in line. It's still not easy, of course, but that's one of the efforts that they're doing in terms of PlayStation Mobile and moving PlayStation IP to mobile. Jim Ryan says, and I quote here, "The thinking here is that our IP portfolio is in such a strong state right now, it seems perverse to restrict the enjoyment of it to our existing PlayStation community." He also openly acknowledges that for PlayStation 5, they're definitely getting very aggressive with making sure that they have software within the first 1 to 2 years of the console lifecycle, specifically citing PS4 and how, while PS4 had a great library towards the end, a lot of those games did not ship until 2015 and onward, right? And that is a PS4 criticism from back in the day, and that's very true. That's how that console played out. Jim also touches on the Cyberpunk situation, saying that it was a tough decision, but it was in the interest of the PlayStation community, which is certainly good PR speak. There's plenty of weird quality control issues on the PS Store that you could bring up, but at the same time, I mean, this was them also probably being frustrated with having to alter the refund policy and then just saying, okay, take the whole game down. It's definitely an about-face statement, but that's a statement that was made. Probably the most interesting thing out of this piece from Axios is Jim Ryan commenting on his famous 2017 quote about how PS1 and PS2 games looked ancient at that Gran Turismo event, his famous quote. So I'm going to read you what he's now responding to, or how he's acknowledging this, where Jim Ryan says, and I quote here, "It goes with the territory, but I get a little frustrated at still being hit over the head with this one. The point I was trying to make, obviously not very well, was just how great the PS4 version looked and how far the series had evolved. I certainly wasn't trying to be disrespectful to our heritage. What is important to recognize when considering this question about designing a new platform is that time, engineering, resource, and money are all finite, and that important trade-offs have to be made in terms of what's included and what's not." And he ends it with saying, "I guess my big learning from all of this is that when Kazunori Yamauchi unveils the next Gran Turismo side-by-side with its history, that I will keep my mouth shut." So there is your response to Jim Ryan's famous 2017 quote. Honestly, I think it's a fair quote given the circumstance. I mean, this is a topic we've covered so many times, and it's basically what I have said before, which is there are trade-offs. It requires time, money, and resources to make sure you've got a good working emulator. But the elephant in the room in that situation is PlayStation 3, right? And so I still find it incredibly perplexing that we've got 200 something PS1 classics and then 200 to 300 PS2 classics that are stuck on the PlayStation Store on PS3. I don't know why these games were not migrated over. I don't know if it's a license thing where they're only allowed on that particular store and not on new platforms beyond the original storefront that they were approved for. Maybe it is too costly to move over all these games to the new storefront where it would be a goodwill initiative, because that's what it is. For as much as I love backwards compatibility and older games and collecting old games, you know I'm all about that stuff, but we approach these things in a realistic manner. We're not trying to be a corporate apologist. It's just that it's not a feature that's used all that frequently for these really older titles. Right now, of course, PS4 X1 software makes sense on these current gen machines, but that's why even for Microsoft, it's still a goodwill program. They monetize that program by putting all those games through recertification and QA, so they can sell them to you again if you don't have the original disc. That's why Sony did 50-something PS2 games where they're up-res, trophy support. They sell those as well without disc support because they really wanted you to buy those games first and foremost. But Jim Ryan was being very candid 4 years ago when he made that offhanded comment, so it's something where, you know, we kind of knew their stance on this for a long time now, but it's something where it has to make sense for them. But it really is pretty embarrassing that we don't have the PS1 and PS2 stuff, because it is something where it's fairly straightforward compared to PS3. All day, every day, I will say PS3 is probably going to be an absolute pain, extremely complicated to reliably emulate, and just would not even be remotely worth it. But Sony has every opportunity in the book to migrate these 500, 600 something games from PS1 and PS2 and, you know, really start to even out this conversation between how Sony cares about their lineage versus Microsoft, right? You know, they have every opportunity to really put that stuff behind them, and if Jim Ryan wants to, you know, do that for his comments, I think that's where you would start. For our next news story, Grand Theft Auto 5 on PS3 and Xbox 360, the online services are shutting down December 16th, 2021 this year. Alongside LA Noire and Max Payne 3, those are shutting down September 16th as well. Not surprising. I mean, they're 7th gen games. We're seeing a lot of these shut down. It's really surprising that a lot of them are still officially supported from the developer and publisher's point of view. Although this one caught me off guard a little bit, because I thought, okay, GTA 5, that's one of the most reliable games that we check in on every single year when we do PS3 online games in 2020, you know, whatever. So I was kind of surprised by that, but then I also think, okay, well, there's a PS4 and now PS5 version coming, whereas GTA 4, where that's going to stay online for the foreseeable future. If you're on console, there's no other way to play it than the PS3 and Xbox 360 version. So for right now, at least, that's where those two games sit, or that particular franchise sits, where GTA 5 shutting down on 7th gen, which is unfortunate. But we do have a lot of games that are now transitioning to unofficial support, as we've showcased before. I mean, Excellent Kai's been around for a long time, but even some of the folks for Warhawk came up with really clever ways to keep the game going. So if there is a dedicated fan base that wants to keep playing, they'll figure out a way. Now, with all that said, it is time to get to Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. If you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I want to talk about with you all from this past week. Our Tuesday video was PS5, hidden tips, features, secrets, things like that. There's a handful of things that we didn't talk about in the previous two videos where I did like a tips and tricks sort of thing, so go check that out. And then we'll keep watching the Blue Box Game Studios thing. I mean, by Tuesday we should have a better idea of what this will look like, and maybe that will warrant its own video, maybe not. Then we'll do something else, as I'm sure you're all aware. But that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.